Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. Today, folks, we have Ash Maurya presenting 10 Steps to Product Market Fit. Ash is the author of the best-selling O'Reilly book, Running Lean, 2nd edition. We're so happy to have him with us to present this webcast for you all. As we get things started today, I'd like to go over some housekeeping to help you get the most out of today's webcast. You'll want to open your group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we can interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions for Ash. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you all to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for Ash, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we know that they're for him and we can make sure he sees them for Q&A. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you'd like to tweet from the Twitter widget today, you may need to give it permission to access your account. It will automatically append the event's hashtag to your tweet so you don't have to, and today our hashtag is LeanStartup. If you should have any trouble during the event, please take a look at your help widget. If you continue to have problems, please post it in the group chat and one of our staff will help you right away. For choppy audio or stalled visuals, please try refreshing your window. And remember, the best thing you can do for a good audio stream is close any apps that could be interfering. People always ask, so we'd like you to know we are recording today's webcast, and we'll have an archive ready usually within 48 hours. And folks, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Ash for his presentation. Hello, Ash.
Hi, Yasmina. Thank you very much for that intro. And hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. So my plan for today is to quickly walk through some slides that weave together several concepts from my book, along with some newer concepts I've come across since writing the book. And then we'll take the rest of the time to answer as many questions as we can fit in. So I'd like to start off by identifying myself first and foremost as a practicing entrepreneur. And so I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this unfortunately is the sad reality. Most startups fail. Most products in general fail. But most of you should already know this. The more interesting statistic, though, is not as much the high failure rate, but the fact that most startups that actually succeed report having drastically changing their plan along the way. So what that tells us is that what separates successful entrepreneurs from those that don't quite make it is not necessarily starting with that better plan or vision, that perfect plan A, but finding a plan that works. And the key part here is before running out of resources. So up until now, finding that better plan B or C or sometimes C has been based more on guts and intuition and luck. There's been no systematic process for going from that initial plan to one that works. And that's the problem that I set out to tackle in my book and what I want to focus on today. So for today, I really want to focus on what it means to find that plan that works. In other words, what it means to get to product market fit and how we systematically navigate our way there. So I'm going to start with a definition. So even though Mark Andreessen coined the term, or he didn't coin the term product market fit, but he definitely helped popularize it in a blog post that he wrote several years ago. In that blog post, he described what product market fit felt like. And you can read through this quote here. It's the point in time when customers are buying and using your product faster than you can keep up. In other words, this is when your hockey stick curve begins to take off. The problem with this definition, though, is that while it tells you what product market fit might feel like, it doesn't tell you how to get there. As a result, getting to product market fit is often seen more as this black art or a function of luck. But there is more science to it. You can navigate the path to product market fit systematically, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. So the talk itself will be broken into three main learning milestones or stages that products go through, and we'll walk through each one in turn. The first stage is problem solution fit. So before you get caught up in building and optimizing your product, you can take a number of steps just to start with that maximize your odds of building a successful product. The fundamental question we ask ourselves at this stage is whether we have a problem worth solving in the first place. And the way that we do this is by first documenting our initial plan or initial vision, because we have to draw a line in the sand. And the reason that this step is so critical is because as entrepreneurs, we are especially gifted at building these reality distortion fields around ourselves and convincing ourselves that we are on the right path at all times. Now, while passion and determination are key attributes for success, left unchecked, they can also turn our journey into a faith-based one driven by dogma versus facts. Now, and again, traditionally we have used business plans for this purpose, and I'd like you to raise your hand, even though I can't see you, if you've ever written a business plan before. Now, leave your hand up if you enjoyed that process. Usually when I ask a room full of people this question, all but one or two hands go off and there's laughter in the room. Now, the intention behind business plans is sound, but I feel that the format is all wrong. My main issue with business plans is that they take several weeks to write, and the people that make you write them, typically investors, don't themselves take the time to read them. They instead ask for the one-page executive summary, the 10-page slide deck, or the 30-second elevator pitch. Now, if you're going to have to condense your business plan down to that level anyways, why not start there and avoid the waste to begin with? Especially since, if you remember, the perfect plan is a myth, and it's going to change a lot along the way. So the alternative to the business plan is creating a more portable one-page business model, which looks something like this. This is the lean canvas format I adapted from Alex Osterwalder's original canvas, which I'll show here in a second. If you've ever written a business plan before, you'll immediately recognize most of the building blocks on the canvas. Compared to a business plan, the lean canvas takes 20 minutes or so to create. It forces you to be a lot more concise, and because it fits on a page, people can't help but read it and can't help but have an opinion. And that last part is really key, because conversations with people other than yourself is what's really important for empirical learning and working your way to product market fit. So I'm going to switch and show you what the original canvas looks like. So this is what Alex Osterwalder's canvas looks like. And for those that might be interested, I've highlighted some of the changes that I made. Now, I'm not going to go into the details for my changes, but if you're curious, there is a longer post that I wrote that goes into what those differences are and why, what was my motivation for making those changes. So moving on, while it's important to have a big vision, a vision by itself is not enough. The next step in the process is creating an implementation strategy or rollout plan that outlines how you intend to realize this vision. And the reason that's important is because when entrepreneurs get hit by an idea, that idea comes in as a single clear signal, but we can decompose that idea into its component pieces made up of vision, strategy, and product. Just going to wait for this pyramid to build out. And the mistake that many entrepreneurs make is rushing up this pyramid and prematurely falling in love with their product. But your vision and strategy are foundational pieces, and they have to be in place first before you can really build a solid product. Now, I would argue that Facebook didn't win on vision alone, but through their strategy. If you think about it, they weren't the first social network, and all the other social networks out there had the same vision of connecting everyone and becoming the largest social network on the planet. Facebook also did not have any inherent unfair advantages on day one. Their competitors had a big head start, had much larger social networks, had more resources and better funding than Facebook. But Facebook still won. And the reason that Facebook won was because they rolled out their social network very differently. Instead of publicly launching their product and building a brand new social network like their competitors did, where the size of the network mattered above everything else, Facebook instead focused on removing engagement friction out of pre-existing social networks like the ones found on college campuses. They also used a number of tactics like stage rollouts on Ivy League schools to build scarcity and desire for their product. I would argue that it was these things that led Facebook to creating the largest social network that we know of today. The next step in the process is honing in on your early adopters. Now, continuing on that Facebook example, while we would all like to build a mainstream product like Facebook that is used by practically everyone almost around the world, even Facebook started with a very narrow definition of an early adopter, which happened to be a college student. And not just any college student, but a college student at the Harvard campus. Now, at this stage, it's very important to qualify your early adopters. These are a subsegment of your overall customer segment who need your product the most and are often as visionary as you are. Your entire business model can change by the choice of your early adopters. So at this stage, you have to make sure that you define and qualify them well. Now, for those of you that have read Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, you'll be quick to point out that the early adopters behave very differently from mainstream customers, and there is this chasm that Geoffrey Moore talked about that can be difficult to cross later on. But here's the thing. Most of you and most of us are at the beginning of this curve. We should be so lucky to have a chasm to cross one day. Also, the key point in his book is that you can't really cross this chasm by trying to leapfrog early adopters and avoiding them, but rather by riding the curve and using early adopters to build enough momentum to use them for learning to then leap over the chasm when the time comes. Now, the real reason, though, we spend time identifying and learning from our early adopters at this early stage is because it is through these conversations that we are best equipped to define and build the first iteration of our product, or what we call the minimum viable product. There are a number of definitions of MVP or minimum viable product out there. This one is mine. A minimum viable product is not your final solution, but rather it's the smallest solution you can build that delivers customer value and ideally also captures some of that value for yourself. That's just a fancy way of saying it gets you paid. So I'm a big believer in charging for your products for day one, which is often something that I get a lot of questions on. I'm happy to address that at the end of the talk. But moving on, once your MVP or your initial product release 1.0 is built, you then enter the second stage, which is the early traction stage. The key question at this stage is asking yourself whether you have built something that enough people want. Now, when you first launch a product or your minimum viable product, lots of things can and do go wrong. The common tendency here is to want to collect as much data as possible. In today's world where we can measure almost anything, the reality is we often end up drowning in a sea of information. Now, this is what we expect from our metrics dashboard. I've got a picture here. It may not be coming in very clearly, but this is Tony Stark, Iron Man, and his dashboard, where he can wave with a few hand gestures. He can get any information on his fingertips, and that's how he runs his products. But this for us, though, this in fact is what reality really looks like. We often start out with a few tools, but pretty soon we're not reaching actionable learning, but we're actually drowning in a sea of numbers and not without much clarity. So what we really need here is not as much getting to more numbers, but really we need to establish a standard measure of progress. Much like we have standard financial statements to measure established companies, we need a standard set of metrics to be able to measure startups at that pre-revenue stage. Now, at my company, Spark 59, we standardize our measure of progress around 5 macro metrics, first described by Dave McClure, which some of you should already be familiar with. I also cover them in quite a bit of detail in my book, because that's something that is highly foundational to the content in the book. The goal during this stage is getting enough customers through the customer lifecycle. The focus should be on delivering value before pursuing growth. Because if you can't even deliver value, then trying to add more users to the top of the funnel is really a form of waste. So let's go back to this picture and try to see which of these metrics qualify as value metrics. So even though we want to measure the entire funnel, the entire life cycle, there are 2 metrics that particularly stand out as being important. The first is activation. This measures the first user experience that you deliver to your customers. If your product doesn't deliver a great first experience, your users will probably leave and never come back. The second metric that is key at this stage is retention. This is a measure of how often people use your product. It's a measure of repeated use, and is one of the strongest indicators that you have built something that people want. On this picture, I mark revenue as optional. And the reason I do that is because oftentimes their different products don't actually charge from day one, so revenue is not really as relevant. But the more important reason is that even if you do charge from day one, if you do charge for your product and you have good retention, then retention and revenue tend to mirror each other, and it's good enough just to focus on retention. Now, since at this stage we don't have a lot of customers yet, the learning tends to be a lot more qualitative than quantitative. This often makes entrepreneurs nervous because it doesn't seem like the learning is all that statistically significant. But here's the thing. When you first launch a product, most people won't get it anyway. I often challenge entrepreneurs to focus on just 10 customers, not 10,000 or 100,000, but just 10, and getting those 10 customers through the funnel first. And the logic behind that is that if you can't even get 10 hand-picked customers, your early adopters, through the funnel to where they end up paying you and maybe giving you a positive testimonial, adding more users to the mix is not going to change things. In fact, it's going to distract you and keep you from learning as quickly as possible. At this stage also, being able to count your early customers on your fingertips, if you have just 10 or less, is actually a gift. You don't need any fancy analytics tool to distract you. You can simply plot all your customers on a central board like this and keep tabs on them through real conversations, either over email or through face-to-face conversations. Now, once you have established some of these value metrics, once you've demonstrated that some of these value metrics are working at a small enough scale, you are then ready to shift towards scaling your product towards product market fit. Now, the key question that comes at this point is, how do I scale this product? How do I accelerate my plan that is starting to work? And the first step here is identifying your key engine of growth. An engine of growth is a term that Eric Ries defined in his book, The Lean Startup, where he describes 3 key engines of growth that products use or startups use to create sustainable growth. And I'm going to walk through each of them just briefly here. So we'll map them out on the customer lifecycle as we did with the value metrics. So the first engine of growth is the paid engine of growth. And this aims to improve your customer user base by adding more people to the top of the funnel. So you employ tactics like paid advertising or hiring a direct sales force, or even using social media, which is not as much of a free channel because it still requires a lot of human capital to run. So it's still a form of a paid channel. And the point of this is that you expend some effort to acquire new customers at the top of the funnel, and the math that has to work out is that the effort you spend has to be less than the overall value those customers create for you, for your product to sustainably grow. The second engine of growth is the sticky engine of growth. This one works on the retention trigger. So the idea behind this one is, if we can improve the lifetime value, if we can improve the time that customers stay with us, then they generate more value for us over time, and that's the way that we can grow our business. The final engine of growth is the more popular and commonly known viral engine of growth. And this works on the referral trigger. So it uses the fact that we have got happy customers who are also passionate about our products, and we try to incentivize them or just encourage them in some cases to spread the word and bring more people to the party, more people to the product. And that's the way that we grow the business that way. Now, it is possible for more than one of these engines of growth to apply to your startup. In the case of Facebook, all 3 of these engines of growth could have been used. But in order to maximize return on effort, you have to focus on one primary engine of growth at a time. So the question that people obviously have is, how do you pick that one? The way that you pick that is by picking the engine of growth that stands to deliver the biggest impact at that point in time, and then you double down on that one. So in the case of Facebook, that was easy. Even though they had possibilities of using all 3 engines of growth, because they were seeing inherent viral behavior in their product, the viral engine of growth is the one that grows the fastest, and that's the one that they would want to spend time doubling down on. So let's shift gears to a slightly different topic. Now, at this stage, the learning does begin to shift from qualitative to becoming more quantitative because you are adding more customers. But ironically, as you add more users, as you add more customers, measuring progress actually gets harder, not easier. And there are generally two reasons for this. The first is that your product is constantly changing. You're constantly adding new features. You're constantly marketing the product. And if you aren't doing it, other people are starting to do it for you. And so things start to get a little bit out of hand. The second reason is that the more interesting customer lifecycle events tend to be long lifecycle events. And so it makes it harder to basically determine which events are driving them. I see this image didn't come together all that well, but I'll still just try to talk through it. Now this is where cohorts really help. So what cohorts essentially do is they help you to correct for this time shifting that often happens, where people may sign up on day one but don't upgrade for several weeks, sometimes months at a time. And cohorts help you group these customers together so that you can more accurately derive cause and effect, so that when you do push a feature out, you can be able to tie the observed results to that particular feature. If you do go out and run a marketing campaign, you can tie those things together. And so that's why it's important at this stage to start measuring things more on a cohort basis than at an aggregate revenue or aggregate user level. Another problem with just relying on metrics is that they tell you what might be going wrong, but they don't tell you why. Now, you can try to guess at what's going wrong and try to fix it with more features or other things that you can do in the product, but there's an even better way, which involves building a continuous and sometimes automated feedback loop with your customers so we can get these rapid hypotheses about what might be going wrong and start to fix them. So here's how we do this in some of our own products. This is a screenshot from one of our products that's showing our activation subfunnel. It shows what happens from the point people sign up till the point they do something interesting in our product. On the left-hand side, you can see all the detailed steps that the users took and the drop-offs that they had along the way. Now, I can use this data to try and guess what might be causing those drop-offs, and maybe I try to fix them. But the right-hand side is where the real action is. Once I realize that behind all of those numbers there are actual people, I can begin to visualize them and begin to talk to these people. So from this picture, I can not only see all the people who successfully completed this particular task or this funnel, but I can also see all of them that dropped off. So with the toggle over here, I can look at all the users that failed to complete this particular task. Now I have their names and email addresses, which lets me reach out to them and try to understand what went wrong. At this stage, because we have so many customers, manually sending out these emails quickly becomes tedious. After a while, it starts to get a lot of work to send and then correlate all the responses back. So we ended up automating this process using an email autoresponder that looks something like this. This single email that we send it at a particular point in time when people fail to complete a particular task, generates for us 20 to 30 email responses a day, and this is where people are telling us what went wrong. Now, we don't get a 100% return rate, but even that 20 to 30 email a day has been instrumental in helping us understand what kinds of things are going wrong and doing something about them. Now, the last point that I'd want to make before we switch to questions is that the journey to product market fit is going to be riddled with a lot of experiments that fail. Now, when experiments fail, many entrepreneurs are quick to run away from that failure, and they change direction drastically, justifying it as a pivot. Now, if you've been following the lean startup kind of movement, you know that pivot has unfortunately become a big excuse term and an overly abused term, which is rather unfortunate, because a pivot really represents a change in strategy, but it does need to be grounded in learning. Otherwise, it's just a disguised see what sticks strategy, which is not the most optimal way of learning and not the most optimal way of finding that plan that works. Now, there's a reason also that the hockey stick curve for most companies, most successful companies, is largely flat at the beginning. It's not because the founders were too dumb or not working hard enough, but before you can find a business model that works, you have to go through a lot of stuff that doesn't. So that brings me to the main point that I want to make, and that's that the answer isn't running away from failed experiments, but rather digging deeper, taking the time to uncover the root cause of these failed experiments, which are better labeled, in my opinion, and as you see from the Buckminster-Fuller code, as unexpected outcomes, is where you'll really find these true breakthrough insights. So that was a quick overview of this journey of product, from going from the initial ideation stage to product market fit. Let's switch now and see if we have any questions from the audience.
Great. Thank you so much, Ash. Folks, as you heard, we are at Q&A now. Please open your group chat widget if you haven't already done that. Type in your question, send it in so Ash can answer it while he's with us. And Ash, we'll start with a question from Rachel. She says, I struggle with defining testable experiments. Please talk a bit about how you can learn to do that.
Perfect. That's actually a great question. I'm glad you asked it. And just coincidentally, I know we're going to talk about the next webinar. I'm going to get into a lot of detail just on that topic. So there's a new area that I've been fascinated by, and that's a term called it's a term that we generally use called innovation accounting. And one of the key aspects there is experiment design and experiment creation. But I'll highlight some of the main points for creating testable experiments. So I would say that there are two very important things that you have to do when you create the experiment. One is you need to declare the outcome up front. If you don't do that, we risk running into that trap of rationalizing the results after the fact. So as Eric likes to often say, if you just wait to see what happens, you will always succeed because something will happen. So it's very easy for us to rationalize after the fact. So what we do want to do is be very declarative. So I often start with identifying that key metric that I talked about. So let's give an example. Say I have a product that has low activation, and that is the low-hanging fruit that I need to go improve. I would craft experiments around that, but I would want to put some skin in the game. I would want to declare what expected outcome I would want to get. So it might be an activation rate bump of 20% or 30%, whatever that number is. At the beginning, it's not as important to get the number right, but it is important to tie it to something that you will do and something that you will expect to measure. So that is step one, creating what we would call a falsifiable hypothesis. The second step is then additionally time boxing that experiment. So oftentimes we run an experiment, and if it's not time boxed, if it's just kind of left running for a long time, the inclination is to just keep it running slightly longer, and pretty soon weeks go by and months go by, and we haven't reached any conclusive outcome from that experiment. Now, by time boxing it, it forces us to mark that experiment as failed. So if we think that within 2 weeks we're going to sell 10 copies of our product, and 2 weeks comes by and we have sold 2, that's a reason for us as a team to get together and talk about that failure, or talk about that unexpected outcome, I should say. And by digging into those reasons is where that conversation helps us to then further refine that experiment and decide to either improve it and keep running it, or kill it and do something more drastic. So hopefully those two things I think are kind of key to good experiment design. And next time I'll talk about some more things on top of that.
Great. Thank you so much. We have a question from Steve. Steve was asking, where is conversion in this metric? And he says it's in regards to pirate metrics. Imply your marketing and landing page was responsible for conversion versus activation.
Sure. So I guess the word conversion is pretty broad. Like you can use conversion to measure all kinds of things. That just means that you go from one state to the other. But I'm going to assume that you're talking about maybe paid conversion rate. And I would say that would come on the revenue part. So in the pirate metrics, there's acquisition, which measures people going from being unaware about your product. So these would be visitors on your landing page, for example, to them becoming interested in your product. So they take some steps. They might take some time to download something or spend enough time on your site. That's how we would measure the acquisition conversion rate. Then there's the activation conversion rate, which is once they sign up for your product, how much time do they spend before they get to that aha moment, which is them saying this is a valuable enough product for me to come back the next day. So that would be the activation rate. It measures the first user experience. And then we have retention, which is measuring repeat usage. So people might, and in the video gaming world, we measure things as daily retention rates. In other products, in SaaS, more like SaaS products, daily might be too frequent. So we do weekly retention rates, or even sometimes monthly retention rates. But that's again just a measure of how often people are coming back. And then you have the revenue, which would be your paid conversion. So that measures how many of those users that went from being just visitors on your site to actually buying your product over a period of time. And it may not be that same day. It may be over several weeks or months. And then you finally have referral, which is there's a referral conversion rate as well, which is how often do people refer your product to others. And you can do some more analysis there to tie in referrals that actually convert. So when somebody spreads the word, that's only one side of the referral. On the other side, you want people to accept the recommendation and then ideally become a customer. So you can close the loop there, and it gets a little bit more complicated because you have to tie all sides of that workflow, but that's how you would get the viral coefficient or the referral conversion rate there.
Thank you very much, Ash. Another question here from Jerry, who's joining us all the way from Finland today. He asks, in mobile app development, it's really hard to reach individual customers. App Store downloads are a black box. We use TestFlight to determine what people are doing with the app, but we can't get back to them. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, mobile, unfortunately, just because of some of the more of the Apple restrictions. I mean, that's where most people have challenges, both in terms of pushing updates out as well as getting access to the user base is somewhat tricky. So there are definitely a number of tactics that people do. And so in the earlier days, I mentioned how it is important to try to get in real conversations with your customers. And so sometimes people do that initial recruiting outside the App Store. So you might actually have a landing page and you get a list of people and you start the conversation there. You might do some problem interviews, some solution interviews with them. You might show them a demo of your product and get them interested. And one of the expectations of joining your TestFlight program is that they will maintain that channel open with you to have those conversations. So that's one way to do it, which is maybe not completely optimal if you're just launching into the App Store and trying to then reach out to those people. Some of the other things I've seen people do is sometimes, for exactly this reason, even though they might want to build an iPhone app, is they go with the Android app as well. And they use certain technologies where it's easy enough to build both versions, because when you go into the Android world, you don't have as many restrictions, both in terms of deploying as well as collecting information. And so sometimes people go that route. But one of the things that I do often stress is that what you want to do, and one of my points in here was establishing that continuous feedback loop with customers. Whatever approach you take, you want to try to create an easy back channel for customers to be able to reach back to you and you to them. It should be a two-way channel. And that's going to increase the amount of learning that you get.
Thank you very much. Our next question now comes from Kedar. He says, it is sometimes very hard to sell into the enterprise because of latency. How do you scale your efforts to sell into the enterprise?
Okay. So if you mean by latency, I'm assuming long sales cycles. I'm just going to make that assumption because that is very true. And definitely that's a problem. Now, I will say that if you employ some of the kind of interviewing and customer development techniques that I also talk about in my book, and Steve Blank talks a lot about in his book, there what you're really doing is you're using the interviews as a learning process to really understand what customers need, in this case what the enterprise would need. Now, the nice thing there is that unlike a B2C type of a product, that learning translates very directly into a sales process. So if you are successful as a founder, going in there and closing one enterprise and then learning what it is that you need to say to basically close the next 2 or 3, you can then start to invest in a direct sales force and essentially turn what you do into a repeatable sales process and scale out that way. So that solves the acquisition problem. Now, as far as the product development side and the sales cycle, there's no easy answer. Enterprise sales are just going to be long process. They're going to be long sales cycle. The flip of it is that the payoff is greater if you can sell into one big enterprise. It can essentially fund your startup. So it is a kind of a double-edged sword. There's a give and take there. And for those reasons, sometimes people shy away from enterprises. They start with a smaller segment first to get the product to some level. You can actually accelerate learning by starting with a more mid-tier customer first. If you can ideally find an early adopter enterprise, that's also a place to start. But the initial phases are all geared around learning, where you want to get the product to a certain point, you want to understand what the value is, and then you use the testimonials of those early customers to try to get other entrepreneurs. So again, there's lots of stuff that goes into enterprise selling. I'd highly recommend reading Steve Blank's book as well, which is primarily focused on enterprise selling from a customer development standpoint. This is the 4 Steps to the Epiphany book. So hopefully that kind of gave you some good information there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ash. A couple more questions here, folks. Again, we are at Q&A. If you do have a question for Ash and what he's talked to you about today, please open that group chat widget, type it in, send it in, and we'll get to as many questions we have time for. Okay, next question here from Michael. How does this strategy differ for B2B products? Burning bridges during the experimental phase seems a bit risky in consolidated markets.
Sure. So I would say that, and this is something I also stress in my book, is that there are principles and there are tactics. So I look at the principles as being universal. So even if you're going in an enterprise sale, you almost often see people starting out with a handful of enterprise customers. So just to exaggerate that fact, if you were to go and hire a 100% sales force to build a product that hasn't been built yet, that would be a form of waste. And the same thing applies at small scale, and that's why I use the Facebook example, is that they could have opened their product to a lot of people. They purposely chose to make it work really well on one campus and then go from one campus to the other and then eventually to companies and then to everyone. And along the way, they definitely employed some good marketing as well to create scarcity and desire. So I think the principles there are still pretty universal. Now, the tactics are going to vary. But that said, even with enterprises, just like with selling an iPhone app, the key part is finding early adopters. Now, a definition of an early adopter is someone who oftentimes is as visionary as you are as the entrepreneur, only they see things from the problem side. So they really have a problem they want solved, and they're highly motivated to see it solved, and they want to help you solve it, because if you solve it, you're helping them. Now, identifying these people is non-trivial. In enterprises, you do find champions for products, but it is non-trivial to identify them. But that's where the brunt of the initial challenge lies, is that if you do find those early adopters, they oftentimes bend over backwards, and they will allow you into their enterprise. Surely they will create protection, so they will sandbox you. They'll have a pilot maybe that's not as highly visible to their operations, but at least they'll still work with you to make sure that you have what you need to solve the problem for them. So I would say, again, those principles apply whether you were doing the iPhone app, like the question that came in early on, or you were doing the enterprise app. Once you can go and secure a few good customers, as you saw in one of my slides, that's going to be what can make a difference between you learning as quickly as possible and building something that you can then take to more customers, and the difference between just spinning your tail and not really making any forward progress.
Thank you very much, Ash. A couple more questions here. Question now from Hugo, who's joining us from Portugal today. He says, Ash, you wrote in your book that you haven't tested the lean canvas with multi-sided markets. Do you have any updates on that?
Sure, yes. So the book, and that's what I often tell people, is that a book like large software is never really finished. It's only published in this case at some point. Software is just released at a certain point. So yes, I mean, since writing the book, I have worked with a number of entrepreneurs who do build multi-sided markets and marketplace models. And so there are some best practices that I can share with you. The first one, let's just take multi-sided markets. So if you were building a business, say like Google search, where you're trying to basically build a user base and then you're going to monetize that through advertising, the first question there is to ask, what are the two sides? Who is the customer? Who is the user? So in this case, the users are the people doing searches, and the people who are actually paying you are the advertisers. Now, at the same time, the advertising side of the equation is not that risky, simply because we know that if we can create enough traffic, at some point there's going to be some tipping point when advertisers will pay us for that traffic. So I wouldn't necessarily, when I'm looking at it from a lean canvas perspective, I wouldn't try to model advertisers as a separate customer segment that I need to go figure out because it's a pretty well-known, well-established marketplace. So in that example, I would create a single canvas, and all my attention would go into what do users really need. So if I was building Google today, I would say what would Google, what would users do today to search on the web, and how can we build a better search engine? And all my attention would go into focusing on getting those users and making sure that the retention was there with my product. Now, to complicate matters, if we were building a more complex model that had multi-parties, like a marketplace model, there things are a little bit more complicated because there, unlike the Google example where I can just focus on users and when I hit a certain threshold, I can then go to advertisers, in the multi-sided marketplace, I sometimes need to get 2 or 3 sides of the participants in at once. So if I was building a site like eBay, I would not only have to get buyers, but I'd also have to get people to buy those products. So I sell those products. So I would need buyers and sellers, and then I'd need to know what the incentives were for both sides, like what do buyers really care about, what do sellers really care about, and in many ways it's sometimes like running 2 different business models at the same time. And for that reason, I would recommend creating multiple canvases in those cases, one for each party, so one for the buyer in this case, one for the seller, and then begin to identify early adopters in both sides. And sometimes, as you've probably heard the popular eBay story, it started out by selling things like Pez dispensers. And so there was a particular early adopter segment that adopted that platform. And so that's where, again, some of the strategies can surface out, is once you begin to identify incentives of buyers and incentives of sellers, your job is to connect them, even at small scale, try to create, rather than creating a marketplace for everyone, try to create a marketplace around a particular niche and connect buyers and sellers, make the transaction friction a lot more efficient, and then look to see if you want to scale beyond that.
Super, Ash. Folks, thank you so much for sending in all your questions here. We do have a few more, and let's take one here from Rachel. She says, my target customers are authors who are actively marketing their own books. Should I treat a single-person business as B2C or a B2B?
Well, so at some point like that, those labels, I wouldn't necessarily worry about what you actually call them, as long as you identify who the customer is. And so to me, like in this particular case, if it truly is the authors that are going to be paying for this product, then I would really just say those are my customers, and I need to understand what their needs really are. And in a more traditional sense, it would be more of a B2B kind of a play, because the authors are in the business of selling books, and you are helping them with maybe, without knowing much about your product, you're helping them sell more. So it's helping them either with marketing or promotion or maybe data that they can use to do those kinds of things. So it would be more in that camp, but I would still say that ultimately it comes down to identifying them as your customer, identifying what they do today, so what are their existing alternatives, what isn't working so well for them, and how your product can help them do that.
Thank you very much. Next question here from Steve. He says, how do you identify early adopters versus unwashed masses? Is it the pain level, urgency they express during interviews, or something more?
Yeah, so there are definitely a number of like I call them lie detectors and I call them tests. So in a lean startup, what we really want to do is the way we separate the chaff from the noise, or the signal from the noise, is we really want to measure what people do versus what they say they will do. So you can get into a lot of interviews where customers give you the big talk, where they love your product and they promise that if you were to build it as you show them, 6 months from now or 6 weeks from now, they will sign up. Now, when that time comes and you try to email them, they don't even remember who you are, and that happens. If it hasn't happened to you, that's just it will happen. That happens a lot. So one of the ways that I encourage people to identify their true early adopters is to raise the sign-up friction. So as entrepreneurs, it's a little counterintuitive, because we think when we build our product, we should be so lucky that anyone wants to try it. So we want to lower the sign-up friction, and we want to get as many people as possible to try that product, in the hopes that they will fall in love with it and just offer us money. They'll want to buy that product. Having built many products in the past, I know that that's not how reality really plays out. It's really a lot of work. Even when you do build something, it's not going to be perfect. People will complain. People will not like what you build. So it's much better to try to identify those early adopters. So the way that I do that is by raising the sign-up friction. So I oftentimes have other qualifiers. So if you do want to use this product, you have to demonstrate that you do meet certain criteria. So for one of our products, we build an analytics-type product, and it makes most sense. Our learning will be the greatest if we get a motivated customer to want to use it. And for us, a motivated customer is one who is going through some scaling challenges already. So it's not somebody who hasn't launched a product, but somebody who has launched. And so even though we get a lot of interest from people who want to just kick the tires and try the product, we actually use that qualifying set of questions to kind of weed out who we will take on as our early adopters, and the others we tell them, we would love to have you as customers, but not today. Maybe 3 months or 6 months from today, when we open it up to a larger audience, we will let you be early adopters. And so that same tactic is in play by Facebook. So when they launched at Harvard, Stanford and MIT, they all wanted the social network on their campus as well. But Facebook was very deliberate in how they rolled it out because they had a particular strategy in mind on what that rollout would mean and who their early adopters really were, and they were using the college campuses and criteria there to kind of to basically qualify those early adopters.
So much, Ash. I just want to let you know, Ash, people are commenting in the group chat that they're very thankful for you for making so much time available for their questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, along the early adopter line, we'll take a question here that says, how do you feel about the practice of buying early adopters?
Yeah, so that's actually the first time I heard buying early adopters. I have oftentimes, and I had this question myself, is do I buy interviews? Like when I'm looking when I'm searching for early adopters, should I pay for interviews? Like if I was doing a usability test, I would have no problems paying for testers to come and try my product and then give me feedback. But I had this question, should I really pay for customers? And I decided in the early stages the answer should be no. So again, once you can do that at scale, so advertising is nothing more than paying for customer acquisition. So at that point that makes sense. But in the earlier stages, the early adopter should really be one that self-selects themselves. And so again, going back to that definition, these are people who want your product as much as you do, and they're motivated to make things happen. Sometimes they don't even want a discount. So when I was writing my own book, that was another qualification. Many of you know the story of how I wrote my book. Before it was a published book, it was a self-published PDF. And I was writing that, again, much like I build software. I was doing it as a PDF, 2 chapters at a time. And even at that point, I had a number of people who came to me and said they would buy my book at full price. They didn't want a discount. So that was an example, again, of them being visionary enough and wanting to see this book be written, so they would buy it. Now, I had a subset of the group that said they would wait for the book to come out because they didn't like PDF. They wanted it to be a printed book. They wanted it to be a Kindle book or a e-book of some sort. And so those are examples of people who were still customers of mine, but they were going to be more latter stage customers, not early adopters. So again, there I could have jumped through hoops and tried to do the conversion, try to get EPUB versions of even my early drafts, but I decided against it because the people who were willing to get the book in any format, who were actually willing to pay for it in that unfinished, kind of very rough draft form, were the ones who were going to be willing to help me the most along the way, and that actually proved to be true in this case as well.
With that, we're going to take one final question here from Eric. Eric says, how do you do build, measure, learn in a sticky model? Let's say a website with content with ads. I feel the content can affect the behavior of the customer.
Sure. So maybe I didn't understand the question very well. So I'll just try to piece it together. So the build, measure, learn is really the experiment loop for everyone who may not be familiar with what that is. And so the idea there is that when we're defining an experiment, we would go and build something and we want to collect some data, and then we want to learn something as a result of it. So if I've got a sticky model, so say I've got it, I'm using content marketing, or even say I have a content website, and one of my goals is to improve stickiness. So and stickiness in this case would be retention. So I want to make sure that when people come across my content, they actually engage with it, and they actually either comment, either tweet, or they come back and subscribe to something. Maybe they give me their email address. There are all kinds of things that I can test there. And so each of those things I can turn into an experiment. So maybe, for instance, I have content that's a blog, and I think I have a hypothesis that in today's world, people want to consume content more as video because it tends to be more personable. And so maybe I take my next set of content and instead of writing 1,000-page blog posts, I create 10-minute videos, and I post those out as a little experiment, and I measure the engagement of those versus my previous content. So that would be a way of me to say I can improve engagement by creating videos versus just raw text blogs, and measure that. So I would use the build, measure, learn loop to measure that experiment and benchmark it against what I have working today. So hopefully I answered the question as you intended.
Ash, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and for sharing all your knowledge and expertise and really taking the time to spend it with Q&A with our audience.
Sure. Thanks very much for hosting and everyone for joining in. Appreciate it.
Mark your calendars, folks. For February 8th, Ash is presenting another webcast with us. He's going to talk to you about how lean startups define, measure, and communicate progress. You can register for free for that. We pushed out a link to your group chat as well as in your resource widget there. So February 8th, you don't want to miss that. If you like what you heard today, folks, wow, Ash's book has so much more in it that can really help you with your day-to-day. That book is also the O'Reilly Deal of the Day, and what that means for you is you can get it today at an extremely good price as a thank you for attending the webcast. So we do encourage you to take a look at that, take advantage of the good price, and start applying what you've heard today and what you read in that book. You will see a difference. Again, we thank you, Ash. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude our webcast. Goodbye, everybody.